Welcome back to Dead Reckoning, the Human Life Expectancy channel. In this video, we'll discuss what aging is and boldly solve the mystery of why we age. In our video called How Did We Double HLE?, we found that one of the primary impediments to increasing human life expectancy in the past was the time it took us to acknowledge that we can do something to extend our lives. Vaccines, pasteurization, antibiotics, and even seat belts were all initially ignored or dismissed as interfering with God's will, postponing the day when their life-extending benefits were realized. Today, our lives and societies are driven by the notion that aging is inevitable. However, doctors and scientists are now questioning whether this is true, and they're finding ample evidence that aging is actually a disease which may be cured. As biophysicist Robert Sinsheimer put it, quote, "Even the timeless patterns of growth and maturity and aging will be subject to our design. We know of no intrinsic limits to the lifespan. How long would you like to live?" Unquote. Since 2/3 of the 160,000 people who die every day die of conditions related to old age, curing aging offers perhaps the largest potential to enhance human life expectancy going forward. Many scientists and doctors now believe that the aging process is the result of epigenetic instructions that can be rewritten, and that curing aging may be even easier than curing cancer and many other diseases from which we suffer. As Yuval Noah Harari put it, quote, "Even if we don't achieve immortality in our lifetime, the war against death is likely to be the flagship project of the coming century." Unquote. While curing individual diseases is extremely important work, it only gets us so far. The reason is that the rates of most major non-communicable diseases increase with age. If one disease doesn't get you, another likely will. Epidemiologists refer to this as, quote, "the rising prevalence of age-related comorbidities," unquote. David Sinclair likens this to each one of us running a hurdle competition where the hurdles get higher and spaced more closely together as we near the end. As a result, many sources have estimated that curing the deadly quintet of diseases, heart disease, cancer, respiratory disease, diabetes, and dementia, would add only a maximum of 15 years to HLE. In upcoming videos, we'll explore a number of new technologies that are showing promise in being able to extend human life expectancy by curing aging itself. These include stem cell therapies, metabolic manipulation, genetic engineering, blood augmentation, pharmaceuticals, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, cell repair, organ creation and preservation, systems biology, nanotechnology, and digital consciousness. As we'll show, these technologies are advancing rapidly, and there are enormous incentives to continue their advancement. Since virtually everyone wants to live a longer, healthier life, there is a market of almost 8 billion people willing to pay a huge fraction of their wealth to do so. Also, one recent study showed that in addition to the immeasurable human value of increased lifespans, a slowdown in aging that increases life expectancy by 1 year is worth $38 trillion. And extending it by 10 years is worth $367 trillion. But first, we need to understand what aging is and why foremost scientists, doctors, and medical technology experts believe that it is a disease that can be cured. In this video, we'll focus on what aging is and the mystery of why we age. We'll leave "Can aging be cured?" to our next video. So exactly what is aging? Biological aging is typically defined as the increased likelihood of death as we get older. In 1825, an English actuary named Benjamin Gompertz calculated the risk of death for people of different ages in order to determine how much to charge them for life insurance. He found that the rate of death doubled roughly every 7 to 8 years between the ages of 20 to 80, and then it levels off. The mathematical formula Gompertz used to predict this exponential risk in mortality after age 20 is known as the Gompertz equation. It's used today to show that the chances of dying at age 30 are less than 1 in 1,000, but the chances at 65 rises to 1 in 100, and in 80 and 90 the chances are 1 in 20 and 1 in 6 respectively. If death were only due to extrinsic mortality factors, such as predators and accidents, the probability of death would remain constant over time, and we'd be virtually ageless. For example, in Western economies, the yearly risk of dying, what actuaries call mortality risk, is lowest for 11-year-olds, at 1 in 40,000 per year. If we were able to fix mortality at that rate, we'd live to an average age of 1,200 years. For almost all animals, this is not the case. Most animals also experience what's called intrinsic mortality factors that are characterized by progressive loss of physiological integrity, leading to impaired function and increased probability of death over time. This is precisely what it means to biologically age. This deterioration is the primary risk factor for major human pathologies, including cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disorders, and neurodegenerative diseases. So why do we age? It seems that we age because we evolved to reproduce, not to live long lives. What biologists call the disposable soma theory essentially says that there's no free lunch and that any effort, energy, or resources spent on enhancing longevity will come at the cost of devoting less effort, energy, and resources to other important activities such as reproduction. Evolution has been cold and calculating about this. Only genes that result in reproduction get passed on to future generations. From an evolutionary perspective, almost nothing that happens after reproduction is worth reducing your chances of reproducing. The evolutionary pressure of natural selection is thought to cause extrinsic mortality factors to inevitably give rise to intrinsic mortality factors, resulting in the natural aging that we observe. Here's how. For simplicity, let's start by assuming we have a hypothetical ageless species with any constant extrinsic mortality factor. For sake of argument, let's choose 20%, which would mean that if we started with 100 individuals, there would be 80 survivors at the end of the first year, 64 at the end of the second, and 51% at the end of the third, and so on. At any rate of reproduction, most of the offspring will be born to young members of the population, simply because there are more of them. This effect is even more dramatic as each successive generation has children. As a result, the genetic factors that led to characteristics, or phenotypes as biologists call them, that result in more offspring will tend to propagate through the population by natural selection and sexual selection. Note that these characteristics might be different than those that would cause an individual to live longest. This raises the prospect of what biologists call antagonistic pleiotropy, where genes that have multiple effects help us to reproduce when we are young, but may hurt our long-term survival. For example, if a mutation arises that makes you particularly attractive to mates, but causes you to get cancer or die of some other intrinsic mortality factor after you've reproduced, it will win out over those mutations that do not make you such an attractive mate. Harmful genetic mutations that are not expressed until after reproduction accumulate in the population, resulting in species-wide aging. As we saw in our video, Is Evolution Evolving? Sexual selection can lead to mates with characteristics that may actually impair the species' long-term survival, such as male elk with excessively large antlers or male peacocks with long showy tails. Again, any characteristics that make an individual more successful at producing offspring will come to dominate those that merely cause the individual to live longer. No wonder we go through such lengths to attract mates. Through antagonistic pleiotropy, we're literally dying to reproduce. This would lead us to expect that most animals develop intrinsic mortality factors that cause them to age. It would also lead us to expect that animals that reproduce quickly have shorter lifespans, and that animals would not evolve to live a long time after they've reproduced. And broadly, this is what we observe in the real world. Across the animal kingdom, animals have very different lifespans. Some sharks, whales, and tortoises live over 200 years, and some clams over 500 years, while mice live only 1 to 2 years, working bees live only 4 weeks, and mayflies may live less than 24 hours. We find that almost all animals age. The only exceptions, and there are usually exceptions in biology, are some jellyfish, water polyps, anemone, worms, and coral that appear not to age at all. Also, as predicted, animals with high levels of extrinsic mortality factors tend to live less long than similar animals with low levels of extrinsic mortality. The genes of animals that die young never get the chance to evolve the capabilities that might allow them to live longer. On the other hand, animals that are able to avoid dying from predation, disease, accidents, or other extrinsic mortality risks have evolved genes that code for slow aging and long lives. These findings are confirmed by observations that mice that commonly die from predation in the wild live only about 2 years in captivity, but bats that are far more able to avoid predation because they can fly live up to 40 years. Rats, which generally face significant predation, live to only 3 years, while naked mole rats, which avoid predation by living underground, live to 30 years and are immune to cancer. Another example is turtles, who can avoid predation by retreating into their shells and can live over 150 years. It's as though nature wants organisms to live longer as long as it supports or doesn't interfere with their reproduction. Scientific studies also confirm these findings. As soon as creatures find ways to survive longer in the wild, for example by developing shells, wings, or other ways of escaping predators and diseases, lifespan increases significantly. And finally, Homo sapiens has used intelligence to combat predation, starvation, and diseases, and has significantly longer lifespans than many other mammals. It now seems clear that Homo sapiens is in this process through the development of the technologies we present in the Dead Reckoning series, and that an increase in HLE will very likely be the result. Also, as predicted, animals that take a long time to have and raise offspring, such as whales, elephants, and humans, also tend to have longer life expectancies. Related to this, there's also the fact that larger animals tend to live longer. This makes sense because larger animals are often less subject to predation and early death. Also, some large animals are paradoxically less subject to cancer. You might expect that since larger animals have more cells than smaller animals, the odds would be greater that some of those cells would be cancerous, causing the organisms to die. Yet, as English statistician and epidemiologist Richard Peto first observed in 1977, many of the largest mammals, for example whales and elephants, have extremely low cancer rates. This is called the Peto paradox and suggests that whales and similar large species may have superior abilities to fight cancer. However, it's not always the case that large animals live longer. For example, the average lifespan of the white-tailed buck, which suffers high rates of predation, is 2.6 years, while microscopic black coral specimens have been found that are over 4,200 years old. Biologists have created a longevity quotient, which characterizes how much longer or shorter a species lives than you would expect given its size. Longevity quotients reveal that bats, naked mole rats, and humans live longer than you'd expect, and chickens live shorter than you'd expect given their sizes. Studying long-lived species gives us hints as to what might contribute to longevity. Bowhead whales are considered to be the longest living mammals, living for over 200 years. They're too large for most predators, each during the Canadian Arctic summer when the sun is shining, and they can feast on a ton or more of zooplankton every day. However, in the dark, cold winter, they live off of their fat reserves. They also often hold their breath for up to an hour, subjecting them to significant hypoxia, which we'll show can extend longevity. As we mentioned, naked mole rats live much longer than normal rats. They've evolved to be cold-blooded with extremely low metabolism. They escape predators by living underground, feast on roots during the rainy season, but fast during the dry season when the grounds are too hard to dig. They also live with other mole rats in small underground nests that have too little oxygen and levels of carbon dioxide that would kill other animals. Understanding the drivers of longevity in animals offers indications of how human life expectancy might be extended. However, while humans can be proud that we've now largely escaped predation, no one's necessarily suggesting that we should have children later, although in fact we are, or suggesting we should get larger, although in fact we're getting larger too, that we should adopt a low metabolism lifestyle of mole rats or whales, although caloric restriction is being explored, or of course that we should live underground or underwater and endure environmentally driven fasting and periods of hypoxia in order to live longer. Instead, these factors might help us to discover what might trigger extended HLE so that we might achieve it in other ways. So, it looks distinctly like we age because we evolved to reproduce rather than to live a long time. Observing animals' lifespans in nature helps us understand that biological aging does not arise out of evolution's intent, but rather from evolution's neglect of characteristics that cause us to live after we've reproduced. The fact that longevity is merely a byproduct, not the goal of evolution, is actually very good news. It suggests that longevity might be easier to extend than if it had been optimized by evolution. All we have to do is to identify the factors that evolution ignored and modify them to our benefit. In our next video, we'll focus on recent studies that reveal the hallmarks of aging and explain what makes us think that aging can be cured. In the meantime, please hit the like button below, subscribe to the Human Life Expectancy channel to make sure you don't miss our next videos, and post comments for the topics you'd like to have us cover. Thanks for joining us. Till next time, as we say at Human Life Expectancy Inc., Hi Hua! Please, do what you can to help yourself and help us all to live longer.